As we count down the days to Las Vegas, I'm connecting with speakers, sponsors, and industry experts to get a pulse on what we can expect to see at Enterprise Connect 2026.
Hi, I'm Robert Harris. I'm with Communications Advantage Incorporated. I'm the president of a 25-year-old consulting practice. We focus on telecommunications and contact center technology. We also have practices focusing on cloud cost management and 911 compliance.
Robert, it's great to be here with you. You will be a speaker at this year's Enterprise Connect and someone who's had the opportunity to be at the event before. I'd love to dig into some of the things that you'll be sharing and help those who are preparing for their time at this year's conference to make sure that they're ready to get incredible value out of their time at the event. I want to start actually with some of the focus of the session that you'll be delivering there. Part of the focus is on deepfakes and trust in enterprise communication. What do you see as the risk that leaders maybe most often underestimate when they think about AI-generated voice and video?
Well, Justin, a lot of people who have seen my sessions know that they're some people would call them a little bit more esoteric, but that's not really the case. They focus a lot more on human behavior. And what a lot of leaders are focusing on, and people in general, is how realistic the deep fakes look or sound. You know, oh, this looks exactly like the real thing, but that's not really the biggest risk. First of all, we get surprisingly good at detecting what is fake. Things that just convinced us 10 years ago now just look completely artificial. But I'll also spend some time talking about low-tech fakes and frauds and why people have fallen for them historically, because the real risk is how convincingly the fake fits into an existing workflow. I'll give you an example. If you have a wife or a husband and you get a call, it shows their caller ID and they're from the store. It's a scratchy call. You hear the door chime opening and ringing. It doesn't matter really whether the voice sounds that much like them. The whole workflow is, oh yeah, they're talking to somebody who's got to move their car and all this stuff's going on in the background, and it fits into this existing workflow. So it doesn't have to be perfect. The AI attack just needs to exploit a trust in the process. So it's really not technology. It's not the new technology. The synthetic content helps, but it really is the workflow that we need to look at more than how convincing the fake is.
And it sounds like a big part of this is demystifying it for people, understanding what it looks like, how these types of things are engineered so that we can better recognize it when it's playing out.
Absolutely. That's absolutely the case. I'm going to talk a little bit, without getting too deep, about the algorithms behind deep fakes and how they mimic a process in our brain, as a matter of fact. So yeah, that is a part of it.
The topic of trust is one that is being discussed widely. I don't think there's an enterprise conversation I step into where it's not brought up by someone. I'm curious, when you see trust break down in communication, the impact obviously I think can be far beyond the security concerns. Where do you see maybe the most immediate business consequences of trust breaking down today?
I think a lot of it could create some serious latency in decision making, because you have people, they have to hesitate, they have to double check, they're not sure what's real anymore, they worry about even routine approvals and workflows. They're not sure whether anything's authentic. So in customer environments, it can show up as abandoned calls. You know, you look at even with they're trying to prevent spam on, I still get junk calls on my cell phone, and real companies are flagged as likely spam. So it's that same kind of productivity erosion that happens, and declining customer satisfaction. So really the lost velocity, you know, and the degraded customer experience is really the real overall risk. Outside, of course, the very large financial ramifications of a successful fraud.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's different context, but I often talk about how our lack of clarity and uncertainty creates that decision drag that you alluded to. And that can be hard to quantify sometimes, but I think you're absolutely right. When we are unsure and we hesitate and we delay, there's all of these downstream impacts that can certainly be experienced by our organization. I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier when you talked about impersonating others or synthetic content. If I'm an executive and I'm trying to understand my exposure to impersonation or to synthetic content, what are some of the assumptions that tend to give a false sense of security?
Well, okay, I think I think there's two opposite assumptions. One is that our people would recognize a fake. A leader might say they'll know it's me. Everybody knows who Bill is when I call in. And then the second is that they won't ever recognize a fake. What really happens, and you see this in frauds, it's the time pressure. There's always a time pressure element that goes along with it that makes it a successful fraudulent interaction. The second assumption, a lot of people think it might only happen through email. They don't realize. I give one example of an extremely expensive multi-million-dollar transaction that happened because of a full video chat fake. So we'll see a lot more of those examples, but this one is just amazing how rich and collaborative it was, and what a high risk that was. And then other people might think, it hasn't really happened yet, it's not a priority yet, but you only discover this exposure. You're lucky if you get a near miss, right? Because that shows you, okay, this is a risk for enterprise. You're likely to, sometimes you may not even discover exposure. There are people that are using AI agents for legitimate transactions. They have contact centers that are, someone's authenticated, and they're doing a whole transaction because they sent their personal assistant to do it and fooled the agent, and it was a legitimate, it wasn't a hostile transaction, but it's still an example of where people just don't know, and kind of a trust failure between systems because you think you're talking to someone who's real.
Yeah. Well, and that issue with just not knowing is only an excuse for so long. One of the things I think everyone as a leader in the enterprise has an obligation, but an equal opportunity to step into is to better educate ourselves on how these things play out, what to recognize, how to understand the impact it has on our business. And maybe, Robert, on that front, if I'm a leader and I'm coming to Enterprise Connect, there's going to be many sessions, I'm sure, on AI. Of course, we're going to see things on security and even emerging technologies. If you were in that seat of someone attending the conference, what would you pay closer attention to make sure that you can make good decisions when you get back to the office?
Well, I would definitely pay attention to technology. People are already coming up with technology to try and solve these problems. But in a way, just like with network security and cybercrime, there's going to be kind of an arms race. The tools that hackers use are going to become more sophisticated, and the tools we use to detect them are going to be more sophisticated. But if you really want to give yourself an edge above these specific tools, think about design principles. And when I say design principles, it's your systems and also your workflows. You can look at where are we assuming trust instead of verifying it right now. That may be different with deepfakes. And which communications have the most impact? Where is this actually going to really hurt us if something fools us and gets by? And then also decision authority. There's a very big cultural part of this. The way our brains work is really a lot. Our perception is very influenced by motives and desires more than people realize. So creating a culture that allows people to share decision authority and verify, that can have a huge impact rather than just telling people, watch out, this is one of the threats that we found within our organization.
Yeah, that's such a important reminder that we are wired to fill any gap. If it's a lack of context around something, if it's a lack of information. In the midst of all of that, sometimes these stories can get engineered, and I think transparency and candor around what's happening, what we're looking at, the impact it has is really, really important if we want to have people not just on board, but engaged in ensuring that our organization is moving forward productively. And back to that earlier point, that we're not adding other time and delay and complication into how we're making decisions and how we're building things.
Yeah, right. And a lot of the culture that may need to shift is transparency. Large organizations don't like to say we got fooled. They don't like to say we were exploited. They try everything they can to keep it quiet. But at least within the organization, of course, it's going to get out if it goes throughout the organization, but let people know the kind of threats that are happening. Let them understand what happened. Don't condemn them for it, but really making people aware in a way that's more transparent in the past, instead of just a boilerplate, watch out for deepfakes, can go a long way, can really go a long way.
Yeah, in this situation, ignorance is not bliss.
Exactly, that's true.
Robert, you talked a bit about trust and assuming that trust is there or not. One of the maybe epiphanies that leaders may have in the midst of navigating all of the changes and the environment that we're in today is that trust can no longer be assumed in enterprise communications. Once that realization happens, what is one practical step that they should prioritize to reduce their own risk without slowing down their business's ability to operate and be agile?
Well, I would say that if you identify the communications that change the state of anything, an approval payment or authorizing access or 911 centers, I talk a little bit about this. This is a big deal for 911 centers with AI-enabled swatting. And they've tried to do tricks, for example, like add something to call like a question about where is the Statue of Liberty, something that an AI script might not know. The AI scripts have come back and started saying, why would you ask me a question like that? This is an emergency. It's a boilerplate answer for any question it doesn't understand. So that's what I mean by the technology arms race, but really being intentionally cautious where trust matters the most and not letting that be overridden by panic or by that appeal to authority, I think is really what it really is cultural. I hesitate to say that because people think, oh, when you start talking about company culture, you're not talking about tactical, effective things. But really, I hope what people get from my session is the way our minds work. That is a huge edge you can have against these tools.
Really, really good. Robert, I have one last question for you as we get ready for the conference. If I'm attending Enterprise Connect and it is my first time ever being there, what is one thing that you recommend I do to get incredible value out of my experience?
That's a good question. I would attend sessions that are different from what you already know. I know that sounds really attend to learn, attend from things that are outside of your core competency or even your core area of interest, because, it's just so vast and expansive. I would say, take in as much of it as you can, not just what you want to singly focus on. I have gone there in the past because I've been going for years when it was in Florida. Now I only have a 45-minute flight, so I'm going to be great on stage compared to before, right after the 6 hours. But that being said, I digress. I've gone there with a mission, with a specific problem to solve. If you're doing that, it's a great place to do it. You can focus on every vendor, and maybe that's your focus this time. But if you're going just to soak it all in, look at the unlikely sessions, and look at the unlikely verticals that aren't your own. And it's amazing what you can find out and how much you can learn just by looking a little bit out of your box. And there are tons of opportunities to get out of your own comfort zone and out of your own vertical box at Enterprise Connect.
That is such good advice. And I think it is easy to fall into the almost surgical mindset of, we've got to see this, I need to understand this, and we get through the checklist, which is important. We all need to make sure that we're doing that. But I also love this reminder that walking into an event like Enterprise Connect gives you an opportunity to broaden your horizon, to hear an alternative perspective, or to just discover something that maybe you've wondered about, but you never got to hear an expert who could actually share, hey, this is what this looks like in this environment. This is what people are thinking about. So it's a great opportunity. Lots of us getting to come back because every year this event adds incredible value. Robert, I'm looking forward to your session, connecting with you on site, and just appreciate you so much for sharing some of your perspective here with me today.
Thank you, Justin. Looking forward to meeting you too.